Welcome to today's episode of Talent Strategy 60. I almost used the other title of my show in this, and that is that could have been a problem, but this is why you got to be careful when you go live. So today's episode is we're going to solve turnover through learning and development. So that is a high bar that we've set. We're going to solve every turnover problem that might exist at an organization in 60 minutes. Wow, I don't know what that was, but so looking forward to a phenomenal conversation. A couple key things to kind of bring into the conversation, and that's what are some of the learnings that we're going to take from this conversation. We're going to learn how onboarding is a critical aspect of retaining and growing your talent. So we're gonna explore how that ties in. We're going to also talk about some specific tips that learning and development professionals can use or deploy to optimize their value. And we're also going to talk through how training can be structured to fix some of the talent retention issues that exist within organizations. So a lot of ground that we're going to cover in this conversation, and the folks that are going to guide us through the discussion, I'm going to hand off to Nathan to go ahead and introduce. So for everybody that is watching us online, thank you for joining us. Make sure you drop your questions into the chat. This is intended to be interactive, so we're looking forward to a really fast-paced, action-packed 60 minutes of conversation. So Nathan, take it away from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Two very valuable guests on the show today. And I just want to kick it over to you, Ebony, and just to give the people your background and tell them a little bit more about yourself and what brings you to the show today.
Hello, everybody. So glad to be with you for this hour of leadership and development power. My name is Ebony Cepas, and I oversee talent development for TD Industries. We're a mechanical construction company. Over 13 years of coaching and group facilitation. And what I'm passionate about is taking a servant leadership approach to re-energize a workforce into motivating and leading into engagement. And then I help individuals discover their true passion and capabilities to enhance their professional fulfillment and promotability. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ebony. Thank you for being here. Sheena, go ahead.
Well, I have to say I'm honored to be a part of this critical conversation at this day and age. My name is Sheena Lance-Knoll. I'm a senior talent and learning development manager and a leadership and executive coach and DE&I advocate. So that's, really encompasses, who I am professionally. In terms of the crux of my career, my emphasis has really been on onboarding new employees. So I've been involved in onboarding for 15 years and recently transitioned to an engineering and design firm called Olson out of the Midwest. And so I'm really passionate about helping leaders develop emotional intelligence so that they can grow their employees and make sure that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities from the beginning of their career so that they're really set up for success. And so I'm excited to talk about that today and give some people some tips on how they can really enhance their onboarding programs for employee success.
Perfect.
So thank you both for giving us a little bit of intro. I do have some follow-ups. I'm sure you're shocked. Ebony, I want to latch on to something that you mentioned in your intro, and that was specific to your point about servant leadership and how that drives your role as an L&D leader. And I want to tie it into something specific that TD Industries does that encourages that across the organization. And you and I have had this conversation before, and it's the concept of lush. So if you have a moment, I want you to talk through what lush means and how that is a critical component or principle that L&D professionals might want to consider embedding into their learning and development practices. So share with the class.
Yes, thank you. So LUSH stands for loved, understood, seen, and heard. And the premise behind that is it's our connection to one another, right? When we're going to talk about why employees are leaving or the great resignation, all the greats, it boils down to, yes, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but even just 4 words. How can I love someone more? How can I understand them, see them, and hear them more? And that be the foundation of how we build our training programs, our developmental programs. We're going to be doing engagement surveys, right? Every organization is going to do them. You're looking for feedback. Employees are telling you all the time how they can be loved, understood, seen, and heard. And with a servant leadership approach, my job as a formal leader, right, is to empower others, make sure that they're healthier, freer, wiser, more autonomous to make decisions, and inspire them to be a servant leader themselves. So thank you for bringing that out. They both work together because our focus is the employee. Our focus is on relationship.
And that's great context that you shared, and I appreciate you kind of spelling that out. And it actually ties into something that Sheena mentioned in her intro, where Sheena, and I'm paraphrasing, part of your career has been heavily involved in DEI. And one of the key things that you focus on is building emotional intelligence and EQ. And what struck me about what both of you said in your intros is, especially when you look at Lush and how that ties into what Sheena does, it's rooted in building common ground, understanding, and empathy with your fellow teammate. And that's the basis for moving forward as you advance whatever initiative that you advance. So where I'm going with that, Sheena, is when you look at your areas of focus in, building EQ and emotional intelligence at the leadership ranks, how is that a superpower when it comes to team effectiveness, when it comes to employee engagement, when it comes to retention? What's the role of that in fostering better environments for those specific outcomes?
That's a really powerful question. And before I answer the question, I want to just acknowledge Ebony, because I absolutely love that acronym and everything that you just said about it. We're like so in alignment with that. But when I think about emotional intelligence and EQ, especially from leaders, and I literally just had this conversation yesterday with my direct manager, is more than anything, people will lead by how they are led. They will lead by their experience. So even if they don't know all the answers, if they've been treated with empathy and compassion, they are more inclined to react to their employees with empathy and compassion. So I think that really helping leaders understand how to be emotionally intelligent, but more importantly, those who are leading them being emotionally intelligent. So even, as L&D professionals, we have to have emotional intelligence in those conversations. As consultants, we have to come in with that emotional intelligence lens and really looking at how can we serve them in solving the problems that they're seeing within their roles and treating them as a client. And so with what I do, it's really about understanding where they're coming from and having that empathy of their lens and how can I support them and how can I help them, not just in this project that we're working on, but as a human and as a professional, first and foremost. That's going to get their buy-in to any initiative that we roll forward with.
Great stuff, Sheena. And, I think one of the things that I take away from what you just said is the concept of acting from the perspective of positive intent. So whatever stimulus that you're getting when you're interacting with anybody, you always want to be rooted in that mentality of positive intent as you kind of work through diagnosing or solving a particular problem. That's how I understood it, and I think that's a good, sort of basis for moving forward. So we have a lot of conversation that we're gonna cover, and it's going to be really catered or targeted at how L&D can be a change agent when it comes to solving the issue of why employees or why people leave. And I think before we get into that discussion, there's so many reasons why employees might choose to leave an organization, and there's so many different things that you can do to impact their experience within the organization. It can't be narrowed down into any one area. But the reason why I wanted to focus on learning and development and their role in solving a turnover issue is because oftentimes L&D in a lot of organizations and in this in the HR space in general is perceived as the silver bullet for any problem that exists at a team level. A manager encounters some sort of issue with somebody on the team or a group within the team, and the default is, well, that's a training issue. Let's get them trained on it. And you see it over and over again. And L&D is often in a position where they are tasked with just basically taking orders from the business and in firefighting mode. And that's really one of the problems that exists within that dynamic, where my argument is that L&D isn't being leveraged properly to achieve the outcomes when it comes to employee engagement and retention. So let's start with that problem statement and have a conversation around it. So that's my theory, is that L&D finds itself spending way too much time as order takers. And if that is true, what would be your recommendations to shift the dynamic for those L&D professionals who want to drive those more positive outcomes when it comes to employee engagement and impacting employee retention? So who wants to take that first stab at that answer?
That is so loaded. So let's dissect. Let's break it down a little bit on why the turnover issue, and I think it can help our role in trying to help with retention. And so some of the things that have come back from our survey results when we look at engagement is purpose and vision, right? At the end of the day, coming out of the Great Resignation, we're finding that employees want to align with a vision. They want to hear good words, that they're safe, that they're secure, because there was so much uncertainty, right? And we might still be in uncertainty with life happening. So purpose and vision, aligning with that. And does it align with my personal values? How open and transparent is an organization when it comes to communication? And I think communication will always make the list, the top 5 on what a company or an organization can do better. So communication always comes up. But how am I being grown and developed as an employee? And we call our employees partners. So as a partner, as a co-owner, right, in this organization, how is TD investing in me? Not just me investing in myself. Of course, you have diversity and inclusion of thought, of perspective, culture, belonging. So all of those things work together with whether I choose to engage or disengage, quiet quitting, right? Or quiet firing. All those things are happening in the midst of this. And so L&D is trying to solve, an issue that is really beyond them, but it's how do we bring individuals back into focus, back into a culture that believes in them, that says, hey, we believe in you. We want to grow you. You are valuable here. You don't have to look elsewhere. And so L&D can be a change agent in that space. Now, how do we help repair a broken system? And I agree with you, Jim, is when we're order takers and not a strategic partner in the room. And sometimes the work has to be shown when it comes out of the classroom, the results that come out of the classroom or out of the trainings. So because everyone has their own initiatives and they're saying, we want you over here, we want you over here. But let's come back to the organizational strategic objectives, the goals, right? Where do we want to be by the end of this year or the next 3 years? When you come back to home base, that's what keeps the focus and alignment and not just fire, fire, fire. So, hey, does that request align with our organizational strategic objectives and goals? Then that will help govern what the asks are and how we can fulfill those asks.
So there, you said a lot there, Ebony, and there's a couple of things that I want to call out uh, and, uh, and get some clarity around. So one of the things that stood out in your answer, you said it early on. It's, when you're looking at the issue of turnover, you have to ask the question: how is the organization aligning purpose and vision with their actions? And you mentioned a number of things an organization can be doing, but let's not put it all on the organization as well.
Right.
Right. Because there is a component of the talent strategy and the talent attraction phase of the process where, TA leaders need to be honest, as well as candidates need to be honest about, hey, at least on a surface level, is there an alignment between the organization's stated mission, vision, and values and my personal mission, vision, and values? And bringing those things into alignment is the first step. So it's a two-way conversation, and that's one of the things that stood out in your answer. But the other part of it is let's say the organization has these stated values and vision, and then you get in the doors and those aren't being lived. That has an impact on turnover too. So the organization is responsible for making sure that they are actually practicing what they preach across all levels of the organization. And those are really powerful concepts that I wanted to call out. The other thing that I took away from what you said is, and I don't know if you intentionally did it, I'm pretty sure you did, is you hinted at this idea that organizationally, from an L&D perspective, they believe all of these things are fire and forget. Let's do it and then move to the next thing because it's done. And that's not how training works, right? You both know, because you live in the space, training is kind of like an escalator. You get a little bit of a boost, then it plateaus and decline, then you do it again, and you get a little bit of a boost. So it needs to be something that lives with your organization on an ongoing basis. So I think that's important to call out that distinction when you're looking at any sort of change that you want to impact. It's got to be a repeated process. So great stuff, Ebony. So going back to the question, and I want to make sure Sheena has a chance to answer. When we're looking at the question of how do we change the dynamic of L&D to be better equipped to solve those outcomes, those positive outcomes, get employees more engaged, reduce turnover, get employees to stick. What are your recommendations or observations in terms of what L&D professionals need to be doing or should be thinking about to achieve those better outcomes, instead of just being the order takers that often ends up being the case? Sheena, did you lose me?
Oh, I thought you were following up with Ebony. Okay, so
No.
my answer to the question, I think that, and Ebony really did a great job of teeing up my answer in terms of, how all of this ties into specifically onboarding. Is only 12% of employees say that their company does a good job onboarding them. And whenever you think about the long-term impacts of that, 33% of employees are looking for a new job in their first 6 months, and 23% are going to leave by their first anniversary. So in terms of impact, that's anywhere from 50% to 200% of that person's salary that company lost because they didn't have good onboarding in place. So I think that when you look at the impact from an onboarding standpoint, and I love what you just said, Jim, because I literally just had a meeting earlier this month on this exact topic, is taking recruiting, taking HR, taking talent development, whoever's doing onboarding. It's different for every organization, whether it's learning and development, talent development. All parties involved need to be aligned on what are we telling the candidate that they can expect when they come to this company, and then what are they going to get in return? Because if there's an unmet expectation in there, your turnover is going to skyrocket in that first 6 months. And you just wasted a ton of money and resources in that process. So I think that collaboration, that cross-party collaboration within that, and I think at the same time, continued collaboration. So I'm going to go to my recruiting team and say, what feedback are you getting from your people that just started? Do they feel like we're delivering on what you told them they were going to get coming here? And so I think that collaboration is really important there.
Yeah, I want to add one more party to that, Sheena, because that's great. And it'll give you a full life cycle. I'm going to add marketing.
Yeah.
And I say that because we're actually working on our EVP, right? What is our proposition? What do we want people to see when they're looking at us and when we're promoting the wonderful things TD Industries can do for you and how you can contribute to the organization and add marketing. So marketing, they'll see that maybe even before a TA can get to them to talk to them. And so I would just add that group as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, Sheena, you had a great point, Ebony, and Sheena, you had some really great stats, and I use the 200% replacement cost all the time. And I think the people that have known me for a while probably roll their eyes every time I say it, because it's like, it's a go-to data point. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of executive leaders don't even look at that. They look at everything through the lens of talent attraction. Mm-hmm. And, people have heard me say this before. The object of the exercise is for organizations to get off the talent attraction hamster wheel. And that's, by continually focusing in that area instead of solving for retention, you're burning a lot of money. One of the conversations that I had recently with the CEO of Ripple Analytics, he threw out something that was mind blowing to me when I was talking with him. And what he said is that when you look at employee engagement, and that is also something that learning and development plays a role in, when you look at a disengaged workforce, the U.S. market loses somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 billion, not thousand, $550 billion a year in lost productivity due to lack of engagement. So these are, again, other elements that needs to be integrated into a learning and development strategy that gets your people engaged and gets them sticky within your organization. So great point so far.
I think building off that engagement piece, one thing that I wanted to ask the both of you is, what do you feel like it is if an organization is looking at this portion of onboarding? What do you highlight as some pieces that they can zone in on that might be a little bit broken, or some high level points that they could really latch on to say, all right, we really need to pay attention to these pieces? Sheena, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So I think I would start with where I started the beginning of the conversation, and that's our emotional intelligence as professionals. So before I go into that conversation, I need to understand, what are the stakeholders looking for? What, at the end of the day, what's the result they're looking for? Because it's my job to know, and Ebony mentioned this earlier, but it's really my job to know, what are we shooting for globally? And then what are all the different initiatives that are going on? And what is our ability for our workforce to be able to actually create positive change within those spaces? So you have to be really strategic with what are you rolling out when. And then I think, to Jim's point, your learning has to be engaging. It has to be a learning experience. And so I think that so many companies that are really looking at just training, let's push it out. And then also, as L&D professionals, if we're not thinking about what is going to make this sticky, what is actually going to create the result that we're intending, this person is going to come out of this experience with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to be able to execute on these learning objectives. And to Jim's point earlier, we have to consistently go back to that and say, is this working? Is this working? And if it's not, we got to pivot and make a change to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ebony, I would be curious just to ask you the same thing about anything that you see that's kind of broken in this process, or just things that employers could be zoning in on, someone listening.
The word that comes to mind is flexibility, right? How flexible can we be with our training initiatives and practices? Are we doing what we've always done? We're going to continue to get the same result. And so for companies that aren't flexible in changing their delivery practices, or even external resources to help drive a learning objective, can the team internally handle it all? Do we need to outsource? What's our investments look like? If we haven't really invested in our learning and development teams or professionals, maybe we need to pour some more resources and dollars and cents into our team, so that way we can help get the best results. So I would say being flexible, in modalities, in how we reach our employees or our end user. And then also, I'm really getting into career path or learning path development, because sometimes you have this horizontal move or you have a straight vertical move, but how can we create a matrix where I can move to any area of the organization and feel empowered to do so, right? The skills, like Sheena was saying, the knowledge, the talent, and abilities, how can we use them throughout our entire organization versus a traditional vertical or horizontal move? So those are some things that could help.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
I think a great point too, and just being able to make the learner aware of that their certain skill set can move into different avenues, right? And I feel like being able to present that up front allows, kind of speaks back down to that attrition point, where if you know that your organization is fostering your growth and fostering your improvement in whatever area that you feel is suited best, I think those back end attrition numbers do start to
Yeah.
dissipate a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of like side conversations that are coming out of both of your answers. So I want to tackle those right off the bat. So great job so far. Here's a couple of the things that I want to tie together. Sheena, you talked about making training engaging. Ebony, you talked about making training flexible. And Ebony, you also introduced the idea of you need to rethink how career progression looks. Instead of the ladder format, think of a lattice or a web. So let's tie that all together, and let's look at the why behind why it's important. Engagement needs to be focused and flexibility needs to be focused on. And I'm gonna take a particular lens to it. What's happening? What are the things from the employee perspective that needs to be considered when you're trying to make training more engaging or flexible? What's the behavior of the typical employee that needs to be considered when you're constructing a training program that's often missed in most traditional L&D organizations? Sheena, I'll pose that question to you first, and then we'll go to Ebony on that one.
I'll answer the question, but first I have to respond to Ebony's comment, because it really is so powerful when you think about developing your employees as employees, and not just for that next step, not just for the next role. Because at the end of the day, employees want growth. They want to feel like they're getting something from their employer. And so when you can offer those growth opportunities, and honestly, you lose a lot of really high performer people that don't desire to be in leadership because they don't feel like they're growing. They don't have a new challenge. So I love that you brought that up, Ebony. And I think that that's part of coming back around. I think that's part of my answer, is like, that is a piece of it that you can layer in when it comes to retention, is consistently having those conversations around what can we do as learning development professionals to maximize our entire workforce, not just this one area of succession or one area of growth. And I think that we have to be really strategic and stewards of our time and resources within that, to say, well, hey, we have these 5 courses, but could we open this up to everyone and offer it as an optional learning experience that they can come to? Or, as we had at my previous organization, we had a couple of programs for leadership development, but it was self-leadership development. So you don't have to aspire to be a leader with a title. If you just want to be better in your role and you want to be a peer mentor, you can go through this program if you desire to grow as a person. And so I think those types of opportunities are really valuable and really important. And I apologize, Jim, I forgot your initial question.
So I think you're getting at the answer. The question is, when you look at engagement, why is engagement important when you factor in some of the employee attributes, some of the things that employees care about? And to give you some perspective, look at the biggest demographics within the employee landscapes. They're millennials and Generation Z. So when you're designing L&D programs, if you're not factoring in generational considerations when it comes to how people learn, you're going to have a problem. And one of the things that I've noticed is, a lot of L&D programs are not taking in generational criteria into program design. So that goes to the engagement point that you made, Sheena, and it also goes into the flexibility point that Ebony was talking about. I'm curious to kind of tie those things together to the broader L&D community. That how should those things be taken into consideration when you're designing programs to make them as engaging as possible, as flexible as possible?
Yeah, I think one thing that makes me really, really good at what I do is I get bored really easily. So when I'm going through a learning experience, I'm like, would I want to sit here and pay attention to this? Would I take my time, which is a valuable, non-renewable resource? Would I take my time to go through this experience to learn what I'm learning? And I know that I'm not the only person, and I know that my personality is not the only personality, but I think it is a good litmus test to have a few different people with different lenses and different learning styles go through an experience and say, what was that like for you? Did you enjoy that? Would you, like, one of the things that we used to do is we'd ask people, would you pay for this training? And if the answer is no, we go back to the drawing board and we look at, like, how can we make it more engaging? How can we make it more fun? So I think that the first piece is you have to think about what's in it for the employee to go through that learning experience. How is this going to help you make more money, grow as a person, grow as a professional, get into the next step, whatever they're looking for? How is this going to help you get to where you ultimately want to go with your career and your life? And then I think it's also looking at, how does this help the organization? And I think that when we think about engagement, for me, it's not just about work engagement. It's about most companies that are really successful. They have a peer mentorship program, or people have friends at work. So they can establish this network of people that they enjoy spending time with. And that's a little bit harder with the remote workplace now. But there's a lot of different elements that go into that engaging component. And I think it's about creating an experience. So if it's virtual, can you have opportunities for breakouts or, practical application, case study scenarios where they get to actually put into action what they're learning in a real life scenario that they're going to go through, versus just watching a video module that after they log off the computer, they're going to completely forget about it and never look at it again.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is, because you brought up generational differences, but considering your end user and your audience that you're delivering this training to, for us, I want something that's quick and fast, right? So now you're getting more into phone-based training. I can access it from my phone. Everyone has a phone. So whether our employees are in the office or our employees are on a job site building things, I can take this 5-minute module and get training credit. It's easy. Like I said, flexible. Also, just thinking outside of the box, right? Or thinking about your end user. We're in construction. These men and women are building things in the sun, in the rain. I mean, all the elements. What would make them want to come out of the field after they get off of work and do more training when they're tired, right? But something simple as what they value is, I built that thing. That, AT&T Stadium has my signature on it. My quality, my workmanship is on it. So we opened up a lab in one of our offices where they can come and work on their welds. They can come in and work on putting piping together, or just to enhance their technique. And we have every Tuesday and Thursday, it is blown up. These partners come in after a long day of work to come into lab and just, like Sheena said, get with their buddies and work on, a technique that they can use out in the field and get better at it. It helps TD overall. It helps that partner skill. And they're excited about coming, and you throw in a couple of sandwiches and some drinks. They're really good. Food makes it hurts. Okay. So, it's after work, give them a snack, and we're practicing. They're there for an hour, 2 hours. They're getting training credit. And also, we incentivize them, because any training done after work goes toward a free PPT day. That's and they're learning, they're engaged, they're fed, they get an extra day of PTO, we call it PPT, but PTO. So it's helping everyone. It's a holistic approach to engagement.
Really solid stuff, Ebony. And I think one of the things that I found really interesting about what you just mentioned is you made the point of I want things quick, and there's some modern implications to that. So when you look at how people are consuming information and what are the fastest growing social platforms, it's those platforms that are focused on delivering micro content. So you
Yeah.
look at why YouTube Shorts is accelerating in terms of their user adoption. YouTube was already surpassing Google as far as one of the most active search engines, but now YouTube Shorts has taken off. And then you look at TikTok. Most of us, including me, Gen Xer, look at TikTok as something where you can be, goofy and do some dumb trends. But if you look at where B2B content is starting to be
Yeah.
accelerated, it's on TikTok, because TikTok is a great source for micro content. Like, there are so many sales and HR and DEI leaders that I follow on there and on YouTube, because they're delivering bite-sized pieces of consumable information that's actionable. So your point about, hey, we want this fast, training's got to take that into account and really meet their constituency where they are in terms of how that information needs to be structured.
Yes, and even with reels, right, on IG or Facebook, you have even professionals doing 1, 2, 3. It's a 5-step process, and you can watch that reel all over again as many times as you want. So you're right. If we can use micro learning on the studies, whether it's leadership development, whether it's core training or skills development, it's gonna work for generations.
Yeah, and I mean, given the changing landscape of how people are learning and consuming content, and I mean, just naturally, people have different ways to consume information. I mean, one question I wanted to ask you, Sheena, is, I mean, what is your recommendation on how organizations should structure their training model? And just, I mean, given some of the points that Ebony and Jim just touched on with some of the micro trainings and just the bite-sized information, I know that's a piece to it, but also just kind of wanted to get your overall take on how an organization could effectively structure their own training as well.
Yeah, I think that tie-in of what Ebony said about really considering your end user, looking at micro learning, looking at accessibility. Is this something that I can access very easily? The more steps we add, the less likely people are to do it, right? So I think that that's something that we really have to consider as professionals. Going back to, from an onboarding lens, I think that what most organizations don't understand is it's going to take typically about 8 to 12 months to get someone fully productive. And so what most companies do is, going back to the recruiting standpoint, right, is they are like, okay, we have increased workload, we need to hire someone. They hire someone, and then they expect them to be up and running within their first 2 weeks. And that's not feasible. So I think it's looking at people being more realistic with their standards and expectations of onboarding, and giving that new employee that time to learn. And again, that's going to take usually about 8 to 12 months to get them fully up and running. And I think that when you look at onboarding, you want to look at compliance, of course. I think that most companies do a fairly good job of that, right, with HR requirements. But then also looking at clarification of roles and responsibilities. Do you know, as a new hire, how to measure success in your first week, in your first month, in your first 6 months? Do you fully understand what's expected of you? And then once you understand that, the culture and feeling that sense of connection within your organization. And I think that that is really the opportunity for when we think about retention. Now, layering in that micro learning, you can't just throw all the learning in the front end, right? Nobody's going to retain that. They're not going to be able to execute on those expectations. So layering that micro learning into an enjoyable, engaging learning experience over the course of time where they have the opportunity to learn and then go do practice in real time, give some opportunity for low risk failure so they can make a mistake on the job. And it's something where that honestly is one of the greatest learnings, especially in industries like Ebony's and mine, right? Is when I can do something and I can make a mistake in it and it doesn't cost my company thousands or millions of dollars, right? That's not a good new employee experience. So I think giving that opportunity for low risk failure in that onboarding experience is really, really valuable when it comes to creating that process and really fixing some of those challenges that we talked about.
So there's your point about creating an environment where there's a low risk for failure, or creating an environment where failure is acceptable. That's phenomenal. It's one of the things that I often say when I'm in conversation, when we're talking about team effectiveness, is that, me as a leader, whenever I'm leading teams, my expectation for the people that report into me is fail fast, fail often, fail forward. Because that's really where you have your leaps of innovation and leaps of learning. So building that in to your learning culture and your organizational culture is a phenomenal thing. But one of the things that I wanted to follow up with you on was what you talked about from an expectations perspective. We have this philosophy that somebody that comes into the organization is going to get onboarded and they're fully formed. I want you to dive in with a little bit more detail on why that's just completely erroneous as far as beliefs, because you and I both know what's realistic for an employee to get productive, and this has turnover implications too. So when you expect an employee post onboarding to be immediately performing at a high level, why is that an erroneous belief?
I will answer that question again, but I want to circle back on something that you said about the failure, because I think that failure piece, when it's safe for me to fail and I can tell you, hey, I messed up on this project, and you're like, okay, great, what'd you learn from it? That covers all four of those C's, right? Culture. I know that it's safe for me to be honest and transparent with you and let you know that I made a mistake, and there aren't going to be negative ramifications or a negative response to that. It creates that sense of connection. I feel like you're supporting my growth because I just told you I messed something up and you're helping me learn from it. So I think that that's really important. Going back to the expectations piece of it, one of my favorite questions, and I ask this a lot of leaders, when they'll say something, I say, when and where did they learn that? When and where did you learn this? I don't know. I just learned on the job. Okay. Is this something that we would expect everyone to know? If it is, then it should be part of training. And then I think it's trust but verify, right? So if you have those expectations, you should be able to have a checklist that you have all employees go through to verify that they know how to do the thing you want them to do before they're doing it on a project. And so I think that for those expectations, it's don't make assumptions. If you have an expectation and you haven't clearly communicated and verified that the employee understands that expectation, then that needs to happen. Now, secondarily, because of what I mentioned earlier about only 12% of employees state that their company does a good job onboarding them, I think if you're a new employee, you need to seek out clarification. You need to make sure that you're clear on expectations. Okay, so I just started this role. What are your expectations of me in my first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Because that helps you minimize the chances of you not hitting expectations that you didn't even know existed.
Ebony,
go ahead, Jen.
So I know I wanted to give Ebony an opportunity to talk through learning design, especially with some of the elements that came in when you're thinking about designing a learning and development program, and you hinted on some of the structural elements. What else would you add when you're tackling the problem of how learning and development needs to be designed to maximize employee engagement and also foster better retention outcomes?
I agree with Sheena. Feedback through every area of the process. Sometimes when we're developing content, we do alpha test, we do beta test. And I've seen the difference when we design something and we just launch it versus when we design and then we go, we do an alpha, we get some feedback, we tweak, we do beta, we get some feedback, and then we get a diverse audience before when we're in these tests. So before we've ever gone live, we've done 2 rounds of testing and with diverse populations in the room, getting their feedback. And so once we're ready to go live, we have the confidence that, all right, we have a good foundation. And even then, we might tweak 3 months from then or 6 months from then. So feedback is so important to the design phase versus, like you said in the beginning, fighting fires and just cranking something out to whoever's crying the loudest, right? Taking those orders because it's not always quality and we're going to miss something and then fire fast and we're done. On to the next initiative. It didn't even stick. It didn't even land, right? It had no chance when it was being created. So, testing it, getting feedback, and sometimes even with our designs, we do a leadership roadshow. And that has been great with getting leadership buy-in to what they're asking for, right? Well, we know our end user needs to be doing this, or they need to be performing in this way, but they have no clue from that 30,000 feet on what's actually being delivered, what it looks like, feels like, and sounds like. So we do a roadshow with them. We need leadership buy-in. And guess what, leaders? After you're bought in, oh yeah, this is great. We give our approval. You get to kick off that program. You get to close and give words of wisdom, share your story, your leadership journey with those partners, right? Because they want to know, or our partners or the end user wants to know that I'm not alone in this. My leadership believes in what they're training me on. So some of those aspects to design can be so powerful to the overall experience.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up those points, Ebony. And I think it's so important to get that leadership buy-in and to just provide the visibility that they are on the same page as what training is going on. One thing that I wanted to ask, I mean, either one of you is, after someone goes through this training, how do you keep to reinforce the training after the training is through? I mean, what are some of your recommendations on those points?
Well,
Go ahead, Ebony.
I was going to say, part of the design, like I mentioned, is tied to career paths or learning paths. And so we recognize in the room when we're doing succession planning who our high performers or high potential are, our bench leaders are. And so a path is then created where you're identifying what have they taken, what are their strengths, what are their opportunities, gaps. And so we're able to, for the next at least 2 years out, say, here's the journey that this employee needs to go through. So it is a stair step or elevator, I like that analogy as well, approach to their learning journey, not just a destination, a class, an assessment, survey, but it's building you towards your next level, whatever level that is. So that's a strategy we use.
Yeah, I think that your question highlights the importance of what Ebony talked about with that leadership buy-in. So the first part of all of it is all parties involved have to align that these are the objectives. This is what we're achieving. We all feel like this is the path to get us there. And then they have to be the champions of it in the room during the process. So the leaders, whoever is going to be managing the day-to-day of this training, has to be the ones in the room to hear what's said, to be able to implement that on a day-to-day basis, because that's not L&D. At the end of the day, we can help you build the training, but we're not going to be the ones holding daily accountability and coaching for that experience and for that expectation that we're setting forward. So I think that leadership buy-in, and then also, again, the leaders need training on how to train that skill, right? So it's doing that leadership training so that they understand clear expectations. Hey, your employee's probably not going to get this right on the first time. And that's okay. That's called learning. So let's set some clear standards and expectations. And then if this, then this. What happens if they have a knowledge gap? What resources do you have? What happens if it's a skill gap? What resources do you have and how can you navigate that? How can you identify whether it's a knowledge or skill gap? So I think that setting leaders up for success in going through that training process with their employees is also critically important, because otherwise we're not doing our job to be good stewards of their time and energy in anyone going through training.
No, again, I mean, so many great points. I think we've touched on such a spectrum of different areas. And one thing that I wanted to do is just kind of boil it back down and make it very concise for people listening on the other end. Ebony, I'll start with you first. I mean, what do you think would be just a few key success factors, main takeaways that you would want to give someone listening if they're interested in enhancing their L&D and training at their organization?
Perfect question, Nathan. Some success or key tips that I would want to encourage my fellow L&D professionals. Number one, stay encouraged. Number two, like Covey said in 7 Habits, you want to begin with the end in mind, right? We want to keep our employees in mind. We want to keep our leaders in mind. Sticking to the corporate goals and objectives will help us stay focused as well on what the priorities are. So that way, when we're getting all of these asks, our objectives, our strategy is what will guide us. It's our compass, and either it aligns and folds in or blends in, or it doesn't, and it's not a no, it's just a not right now. Because our priority is, what are the training, what are the strategies that's going to drive our corporate objectives? And I'll wrap it up with, stay encouraged. Keep up the good work.
Love that. And Sheena, what about you? If you could boil it down to just some succinct advice, what do you think you would give?
I would start with be a learner. I think that it's really challenging for you to be in training and development, teach others how to learn when you're not committed to learning yourself. I think that every time you go through a learning experience, you take something from that you can then replicate with other people down the road, or it just keeps your mind open to other possibilities with learning. I think this comes from more of speaking to a lot of L&D professionals. Act like a business consultant. You need to speak to the person in the room that you're trying to influence. So if you're talking to stakeholders and executives, you need to speak to the stats and the numbers of how your training is going to help produce those results that Ebony talked about earlier. I think if you're talking, like I tell my folks, my job is to make your job easier. At the end of the day, that's my job, is if I can make it easier for you to do what you need to do for our organization to be successful, I've done my job. So I think really acting like a business consultant, track your results and track your progress. If you're doing a new project, you need to get what those starting stats are, so that at the end of that pilot, or at the end of that alpha, or at the end of that beta, you can show some tangible results. Or you can see, this didn't work, let's go back to the drawing board and try something different. So I think that that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see L&D professionals make, is they don't actually track what they're doing. So they can't speak to the great work that they've done.
Sheena, I think one of the things, and actually both Ebony and Sheena, you've had a laundry list of key takeaways throughout the conversation. But I think one of the things that stood out in just your summation just now, when it comes to acting like a consultant from an L&D seat, I think one of the most valuable questions that an L&D professional has in their arsenal is why. You get a request from the business for some sort of program. To be an effective consultant, you should be able to navigate them through 5 whys to actually understand the root cause or the root reason for the request. And I think if you're not doing a good job, or at least hesitant to take that level of ownership and engagement with the request, you're going to end up still fighting fires throughout the bulk of your tenure as that L&D lead within the organization. So that's a great call out on your part. So before we sign off, I want to make sure that the folks that are going to be that have been watching this live, and also will catch it on the replays, know where to find you. So I'm going to lead with Ebony. Ebony, where can people find you aside from potentially co-hosting the podcast with me?
I would love to. You can find me on LinkedIn and Ebony Cepas, CEPHUS. It's on the screen. Or my LinkedIn name is Ebony Will Train. You can find me on Facebook, Ebony Rochelle, Instagram. You can find me Ebony Cepas or Royal Trailblazer. And you can definitely find me and my face on TD Industries website. So I'm there, tdindustries.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Sheena, where can people find you?
One of my favorite questions to ask is, what is your desired outcome? So that's one of the questions I like to ask, just to kind of help people get into that mindset. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Sheena Lance Nold. I'm Sheena Lance Nold on Facebook and Instagram. Look forward to connecting with everyone there.
Awesome. So I appreciate both of you being on the panel and facilitating some great discussion. For those that have registered or are attending and want to catch the replay, we will be replaying this throughout the weekend. So there will be another airing that's going to be lightly edited that will air tomorrow and then Sunday, and then we'll have a rebroadcast on Monday. So you will have plenty of opportunity to catch the conversation. One thing that I would definitely request is that if you have feedback, definitely get that to us. If there are topic areas that you want us to cover in future episodes, definitely reach out. As far as Nathan and I, we are both, we're colleagues at Circa, so you can definitely find us there. And if you have L&D questions or talent strategy questions, we certainly have time to entertain those conversations and potentially work through some solutions there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Nathan, where can people find you?
LinkedIn is the best spot, Jim.
Yeah, you're pretty active on those TikTok trends too. So if you want to catch some goofy dances,
I don't know if I feel comfortable admitting that to everyone, though. I'll just stick to LinkedIn for now.
See, the key to L&D success is ownership, Nathan, and I'm not sure if you're owning your
TikTok too. All right, Nathan.w.ross TikTok.
Awesome. You can find me on obviously LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. You can find us. Make sure you follow the Talent Strategy 60 page. Tell your friends. We will have weekly topics. Our next topic, we won't have a topic next week, but we will pick up the sequence the week after, and we have topics every week. Sometimes there will be panel discussions, other times there will be author spotlights, but it's going to encompass all areas of talent strategy, and we look forward to having everybody join us for a future episode. Thanks again to our guests, and until next time, we will see you on Talent Strategy 60.
Bye, everyone.